Beamy Ramon, just a regular guy in his early 30s, got a decent job in IT, a small house in the suburbs, and for a while, I thought I had a pretty good life. Married to Hannah for about 6 years. When we first met, she was amazing. Funny, smart, down to earth. We could talk for hours about anything and everything. We had the same sense of humor, liked the same dumb action movies, and just generally clicked. Felt like I had won the lottery. The first few years of marriage were exactly what I'd hoped for. A partnership. We were a team. If I had a rough day, she'd listen. If she was stressed, I'd take care of dinner and tell her to relax. It was easy. It was natural. Then, maybe a year or so ago, something started to change. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow burn. She started getting really deep into some online communities. Lots of articles, blogs, and forums. Her vocabulary started to change. Words I'd never heard her use before started popping up in everyday conversation. Words like emotional labor, microaggressions, and problematic. At first, I didn't think much of it. People get into new hobbies, new ways of thinking. Fine by me. But then it started being directed at me. I remember the first time it really felt weird. Came home from work. She was struggling to open a jar of pickles. I walked over, took it, and opened it for her in a second. Standard husband stuff. Instead of a thanks, I got a weird look. She told me that what I did was a form of benevolent sexism. Apparently, my action, while seemingly helpful, reinforced the stereotype that women are weaker and need a man's help. MFW. I just wanted her to have her pickles. I tried to laugh it off, but she was dead serious. That was the start. From then on, it was like walking through a minefield. Everything I did was suddenly a symptom of some deep-seated issue I never knew I had. One night, I was telling her about a problem I was having with a project at work. I was looking for advice, or at least just to vent. After a minute, she holds up her hand to stop me. She explains that she can't just listen to my problems without me acknowledging the emotional labor she's performing. She said that historically, women have been forced into the role of emotional caretaker for men, and she wasn't going to perpetuate that dynamic. I just stared at her. This was my wife. I wasn't asking a stranger on the street. I just wanted to talk to my partner. The conversation just died. I said okay, and we sat in silence. The worst part was the toxic masculinity thing. Everything I did that was even remotely traditionally masculine was now toxic. If I got a little frustrated trying to fix the leaky faucet, I wasn't just annoyed. I was unable to process my emotions in a healthy way due to patriarchal conditioning. If I said I was fine after a long day, I wasn't just being quiet. I was emotionally closed off and perpetuating a culture of male silence. My hobbies were scrutinized. Enjoying a steak was contributing to a culture of aggressive consumption. Watching an old action movie we both used to love was consuming problematic media with poor female representation. It was exhausting. I felt like I was being constantly graded by a professor I could never please. Her best friend was a huge influence in all of this. Whenever they talked, Hannah would come away with a whole new set of rules and grievances. I could hear them on the phone sometimes. Her friend would be telling her not to let me get away with things, that she needed to set firm boundaries and hold me accountable. Accountable for what? For being a normal guy? The intimacy, both emotional and physical, started to fade. It became conditional. If I had a good day where I didn't commit any microaggressions and successfully validated all her feelings, maybe I'd get a hug. If I said something problematic, I was met with a cold shoulder for the rest of the night. It felt less like a marriage and more like a performance review. I was constantly being told that our relationship wasn't a 50-50 partnership. She claimed she was doing all the invisible work, all the mental load of running the household. This was news to me. I cooked at least half the time, did all the yard work, handled all the finances and bills, fixed anything that broke, and did my own laundry. But because I didn't anticipate her needs or intuitively know when the dishwasher needed to be emptied, I was failing. My contributions were purely physical, while hers were deeply emotional and cognitive, and therefore more valuable. It was a game I couldn't win. I tried to talk to her about it, many times. I told her I felt like she didn't see me as a person anymore, but as a project to be fixed. I said I missed my friend, the woman I married. Every time the conversation was shut down with her new jargon, she'd say I was being defensive because my privilege was being challenged. She'd accuse me of gaslighting her by questioning her perception of reality. There was no room for my feelings in the conversation. My feelings were just symptoms of the problem. The breaking point started on a completely average evening. I'd stopped on the way home from work and picked up a pint of her favorite, expensive ice cream. Just a small gesture, a thinking of you kind of thing. I walked in, smiling, and handed it to her. She looked at the ice cream, then at me, with this tired, analytical expression. No thank you, no smile. She just sighed and said that this was a perfect example of what she'd been talking about. I had no idea what she meant. She explained that I was using a superficial gesture to avoid doing the real, difficult work in our relationship. That buying ice cream was easy, but deconstructing my ingrained toxic traits was hard, and I was clearly avoiding the latter. She said I was trying to buy her affection instead of earning it through genuine change. The ice cream sat on the counter, melting. I felt something inside me just turn off. It was like a light switch. Here I was, trying to do a nice, simple thing for my wife, and it was being treated like a strategic maneuver in a Cold War. I didn't argue. I didn't say anything. I just took the soupy ice cream and threw it in the trash. For the next couple of days, there was a strange quiet in the house. I was polite, but distant. I stopped trying. I just went to work, came home, ate dinner, and went to bed. I was done playing the game. Hannah seemed to notice the shift, but instead of seeing it as a result of her own actions, she saw it as further proof that I was the problem. I overheard her on the phone with her friend again. She was saying I'd become completely withdrawn and unresponsive. Her friend's advice was clear. She said Hannah needed to stop giving me vague requests and create a clear, unambiguous framework for improvement. A contract with measurable goals and consequences. My blood ran cold hearing that. A few days later, she approached me. She had this determined, almost excited look on her face, like she'd finally cracked the code. She asked me to sit down at the kitchen table, telling me we were going to have a formal meeting to discuss the future of our marriage. A meeting. She pulled out a folder, a professional-looking folder with a neatly printed label on the front. It read, "The Relationship Equity Project, a framework for mutual respect and labor distribution." My heart sank into my shoes. She opened it, and inside were several pages of typed text, complete with bullet points, subheadings, and even a section titled Key Performance Indicators. She slid it across the table to me with an air of finality. She told me this was the culmination of all her research and emotional labor. This was the path forward. She explained that all the affection, respect, and intimacy I expected from a marriage would now be contingent upon my adherence to the terms laid out in this document. It wasn't a punishment, she assured me. It was an opportunity for me to step up and become an equal partner. I sat there, looking at the folder, then back at her face. She looked so proud of herself, so certain. She genuinely believed this corporate-style improvement plan was the key to a happy marriage. I didn't say a word. I just opened the folder and began to read. And with every line, the switch inside me that had turned off was now being dismantled and removed entirely. The document was divided into 3 main sections: domestic labor, emotional labor, and ideological development. The domestic labor section was something else. It was a chore chart on steroids. Every single household task was listed, assigned a point value, and delegated. Things like loading the dishwasher and unloading the dishwasher were two separate tasks, each with their own time window for completion. For example, dishes had to be unloaded before 8 a.m. Failure to do so would result in a deduction of partnership points. There was a schedule for cleaning the bathrooms, vacuuming, and even for changing the bed sheets. There was a clause about meal preparation, stating that I was responsible for planning and cooking dinner on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, with the menu to be submitted to her for approval by Sunday evening. It even had an appendix with a diagram showing the correct way to stack the dishwasher for maximum efficiency. I felt like I was reading a training manual for a job I never applied for. Then I got to the emotional labor section. This was where it went from absurd to surreal. It mandated a daily emotional check-in session for a minimum of 30 minutes. During this time, my role was to actively listen to her feelings without offering solutions, a practice it called holding space. My phone was to be off, and I was expected to maintain eye contact and provide verbal affirmations like, "I hear you," and "that sounds really difficult." There was a list of prohibited phrases, which included things like "don't worry about it" and "it will be okay," as these were deemed dismissive of her lived experience. It also required me to provide a minimum of 2 unprompted non-physical compliments per day. These compliments were not to be about her appearance, but about her intellect, her ideas, or her contributions to the world. An example was provided. "I really admire the way you articulated your point about systemic injustice today." I couldn't believe what I was reading. It was a script for how to be a husband. The final section was ideological development. This part laid out a mandatory re-education program for me. It required me to read one book or a series of articles from a pre-approved list each month. The list was full of authors and thinkers she was always quoting. At the end of each month, I was to write a 1-page summary and reflection, focusing on how the material had challenged my perspective and revealed my own privilege. This paper was to be submitted to her for review. It also stipulated that if I was ever called out for a microaggression, I was not to argue or defend myself. The correct procedure was to listen, apologize for the impact of my actions regardless of my intent, and commit to doing better. The document ended with a section on consequences and incentives. It stated clearly that failure to meet the weekly partnership point quota would result in the suspension of marital privileges. These privileges included things like her cooking my favorite meals, watching movies of my choice, and all forms of physical intimacy. On the other hand, exceeding the quota would result in positive reinforcement, which was described in vague, non-committal terms. I finished reading and slowly closed the folder. My mind was strangely calm. There was no anger, no sadness, just a profound and final sense of clarity. This wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a misguided attempt to communicate. This was a business proposal. She had unilaterally dissolved our marriage and was now offering me a position as a subordinate employee. My role was to perform a list of tasks, and in return, I would be compensated with the basic affection and respect that was supposed to be the very foundation of our relationship. She was watching me, her expression a mix of nervousness and righteous conviction. She was waiting for me to argue, to get angry, to start negotiating terms. I think that's what she wanted. She wanted a fight, so she could deploy all her new arguments and prove how right she was. I didn't give her the satisfaction. I just looked at her, then at the folder. I said, "I need some time to process this. It's a very thorough document." My calmness seemed to unnerve her. It wasn't the reaction she was prepared for. She nodded slowly, telling me to take all the time I needed, but that the new framework would officially go into effect on Monday morning. That gave me the weekend. I went into my home office and closed the door. I didn't rage. I didn't punch a wall. I just sat at my desk and thought. I thought about the man I was 5 years ago, so happy and full of hope on my wedding day. I thought about the woman she used to be, the one who would have laughed hysterically at a document like this. That woman was gone, and in her place was a manager, an ideologue, a warden. My friend, the one I had married, had been replaced by a stranger. I knew I couldn't live like this. I couldn't perform for affection. I couldn't contort myself into the shape of this politically correct ideal she had in her head. It would kill my soul. Living in a house where love was a transaction was a far lonelier prospect than living alone. I called my one friend from work, the one I trusted. I didn't even have to explain the whole thing. I just read him a few bullet points from the contract. First, he was silent. Then he let out a low whistle. He told me what I already knew, but needed to hear from someone else. He said this wasn't a relationship anymore. It was a hostage situation, where the only hostage was my dignity. He didn't tell me what to do. He just said, "Whatever you decide, man, I've got your back, and a spare couch if you need it." That was all I needed. The decision was made. I spent the rest of that evening and the next day acting completely normal, or what passed for normal in our house now. I was quiet, agreeable. Hannah took this as a sign that I was coming around, that I was accepting my new reality. I could see the relief on her face, the smugness. She thought she had won. She thought she had successfully renegotiated the terms of our relationship entirely in her favor. On Saturday, while she was on a long video call with her friend, no doubt celebrating her victory, I started to prepare. I packed a bag. Not everything, just the essentials. Clothes for a week, my work laptop, important documents. A few sentimental items that she wouldn't notice were gone right away. I moved it all into the trunk of my car. I went online and found a short-term apartment rental, one that was furnished and available immediately. I paid the deposit. I went to the bank and withdrew half of the money from our joint savings account, transferring it to my personal account. Every action was calm, methodical, deliberate. It didn't feel like I was ending my marriage. It felt like I was executing an escape plan. On Sunday evening, she was positively beaming. She made a nice dinner, which I now realized was probably a positive reinforcement incentive for my perceived compliance. She talked excitedly about Monday, about how it was the first day of our new, honest, and truly equitable life together. I just nodded and ate my food. I felt like a spy behind enemy lines, hours away from my extraction. That night, I barely slept. I just lay there, looking at the ceiling, thinking about the absolute absurdity of it all. How did we get here? How did a loving partnership devolve into a corporate performance plan? But I knew chasing those questions was pointless. The why didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the what now. And what now was me leaving. I was choosing to opt out of the game entirely. I wasn't going to play by her rules. I wasn't going to negotiate them. I was just going to flip the board over and walk away. I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't anxious or resentful. I was in control of my own life again. The power she had held over me, the power to deem me good or problematic, was about to evaporate, because I was no longer seeking her approval, and a judge with no one to judge has no power at all. I woke up before my alarm on Monday morning. The house was still dark and quiet. For a moment, I just lay there, and a wave of sadness washed over me. This was it. The end of my marriage. The end of the life I thought I was building. But the sadness was quickly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't the life I thought I was building. This was a demolition site, and I was just getting out before the whole thing came down on top of me. I got up, showered, and got dressed for work. A suit and tie, armor. I walked into the kitchen at exactly 6:25 a.m. Hannah was already there, sitting at the table. She had a cup of coffee in one hand and a pen in the other. The folder was open in front of her, turned to the first page of the schedule. She looked up at me and gave a bright, business-like smile. It didn't reach her eyes. She looked me up and down, taking in my work clothes. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. She tapped the paper with her pen. She said, "Good morning. You're a little early. But that's great. Eagerness is a positive sign." She pointed to a bullet point. "As you know, the first item is 6:30 a.m., preparation of the morning meal. According to the approved menu in Appendix B, today is avocado toast with poached eggs." She looked at me expectantly, like a manager waiting for a subordinate to get to work. I didn't move toward the kitchen counter. I just walked over to the coffee pot, poured myself a black coffee, and leaned against the counter, facing her. I took a slow sip. The silence stretched. Her smile started to falter. She asked, "Well, the eggs won't poach themselves." I took another sip of my coffee. I set the mug down gently on the counter. I looked her straight in the eye. I said, "Hannah, I've had the weekend to review your proposal." Her brow furrowed. "Proposal?" I continued, "I've carefully considered the terms and conditions of the employment contract you've offered me." Her face went from confused to annoyed. "Don't be ridiculous, Ramon. This isn't a contract. It's a framework for—" I held up a hand, and to my surprise, she actually stopped talking. I said, "You have laid out a list of duties, a schedule of performance, and a system of compensation and penalties. It's a job description. The position you're offering is the role of husband, and the salary is the basic human decency and affection that used to be free." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She was speechless. I kept my voice calm and even. No anger, just facts. I said, "I've reviewed the terms, and I'm afraid I have to decline your offer of employment. I'm officially resigning from my position, effective immediately." The color drained from her face. She finally found her voice. "What are you talking about? Resigning? You can't resign from a marriage." I said, "You're the one who turned it into a job. I'm just following the appropriate business protocol. You see, I was looking for a partner, a teammate. I wasn't looking for a supervisor or a project manager or an ideological coach." I picked up my coffee mug again. I said, "You've spent the last year trying to fix me, to re-educate me, to mold me into your perfect politically correct man. You've analyzed my every word and action for flaws. You've graded my very existence. And you know what? I'm done. I will not be graded anymore." She stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. Here it comes, I thought. She started, "This is unbelievable. This is classic male fragility. The second you're asked to do the bare minimum, the second your privilege is challenged, you run away. You can't handle a strong, empowered woman who asks for what she deserves." I didn't let the words land. They couldn't touch me anymore. I just shook my head slowly. I said, "You've got it all wrong, Hannah. This has nothing to do with you being strong. I admire strong women. This is about you being unkind. This is about you being unfair. This," I said, gesturing to the folder on the table, "is an instrument of control. It's not about equity. It's about power. Your power over me." I took a final sip of coffee and placed the empty mug in the sink. I walked over to the hallway where my bag was waiting, hidden behind the coat rack. I picked it up. Her eyes widened as she saw the bag. True, genuine shock. For all her analysis of me, she had never once predicted this. She had been so certain of her power, so sure of my compliance. She stammered, "Where are you going? You can't just leave." I walked to the front door. I turned around, my hand on the doorknob. I looked at her, standing there in the middle of her perfectly managed kitchen, next to her perfectly constructed plan for a perfect husband who no longer existed. I said, "I'm not running away from a strong woman. I'm walking away from a toxic environment. There's a difference." She started yelling then, a string of all her favorite buzzwords: manipulative, gaslighting, weaponized incompetence. It was just noise, the desperate final broadcast of a failed regime. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say goodbye to. I just opened the door, stepped outside into the cool morning air, and closed it quietly behind me. As I walked to my car, I could still hear her yelling, but the sound was muffled by the closed door. I got in my car, started the engine, and didn't look back. The feeling of relief was so intense it was almost dizzying. It was like I had been holding my breath for a year, and I could finally exhale. The weight of constant judgment, of never being good enough, was just gone. My phone started buzzing in my pocket before I even reached the end of the street. A text from Hannah, then another, and another. When I stopped at a red light, I glanced at the screen. "You can't be serious. Come back right now. We need to talk about this. This is the most immature, manipulative thing you have ever done." I turned the phone on silent and put it in the glove box. I drove to the new apartment. It was small, generic, and smelled of fresh paint. It was also the most peaceful place I had been in a year. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, and just listened to the silence. No one was here to analyze me. No one was here to grade me. It was just me. And it was okay. Over the next few hours, the digital assault continued. Dozens of texts, missed calls, voicemails. The tone shifted from angry demands to confused pleading, then back to righteous indignation. She accused me of abandoning her. She told me I was throwing away 5 years of marriage over a simple misunderstanding. She said if I would just come back and commit to the plan, we could fix everything. She still didn't get it. The plan wasn't the solution. The plan was the final symptom of the disease. Later that afternoon, a call came in from her best friend. I let it go to voicemail. The message was exactly what I expected. She didn't ask how I was. She just launched into a lecture. She told me I was a coward, that I was proving every negative stereotype about men, and that Hannah was a wonderful, brilliant woman who deserved a partner willing to do the work. She finished by saying she hoped I would educate myself and come to my senses. I deleted the voicemail. That evening, I sent Hannah a single brief email. I told her I was safe, I had moved out, and that our marriage was over. I said that any future communication about the practicalities of separating our lives should be done through email. I told her I would not be taking her calls. This established a boundary, a real one. Not a rule in a binder, but a line she could not cross. Her reply was a novel-length email detailing all the ways I had failed her, not just today, but for our entire relationship. It was a masterpiece of revisionist history, painting her as the long-suffering victim and me as the emotionally stunted villain. I didn't reply. I just forwarded it to the divorce lawyer I had already found online. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of painful and liberating. Sorting out the logistics of a divorce is never fun, but every email exchanged, every form signed, was another step away from that life. Hannah tried a few more tactics. There was the email where she tried to appeal to my sense of guilt, talking about how lonely she was and how all her friends were worried about her. There was the email where she tried to bargain, suggesting we could rework the framework together to make it more collaborative. She was still trying to get me to negotiate the terms of my own subjugation. I refused to engage on that level. My replies were always polite, brief, and focused only on the legal and financial aspects of the separation. I was a gray rock. There was nothing for her emotional hooks to latch onto. The most telling moment came when we had to meet briefly to sign some papers with a notary. It was the first time I'd seen her in person since that morning. She looked tired. She tried to talk to me before the notary arrived. She said, "I just don't understand. I did everything right. I read all the books. I followed all the advice. I created a perfect system for a healthy relationship." And that was it. That was the core of it all. She didn't see a relationship as a connection between two people. She saw it as a system to be optimized. I was just a variable that had failed to conform to her algorithm. I looked at her and felt for the first time not anger or sadness, but a profound sense of pity. I said, "People aren't systems, Hannah. Love isn't a project plan." She just shook her head, like I was speaking a language she couldn't comprehend. The divorce was finalized a few months later. It was clean and relatively quick, mostly because I didn't fight over anything. I just wanted out. She could have the house, she could have the furniture. I just wanted my freedom. And I got it. Life is different now. It's quieter. I've been on my own for a while. I've rediscovered things I used to enjoy. I can sit on my couch and watch a dumb, explosion-filled action movie from the 90s without having to listen to a lecture about its problematic portrayal of gender roles. I can cook a steak without being accused of performing aggressive masculinity. I can have a bad day and just be quiet, without being diagnosed as emotionally repressed. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Hannah has doubled down. She tells everyone who will listen that her marriage ended because her ex-husband was too fragile to handle being in a relationship with a truly conscious and empowered feminist. She frames my departure as the ultimate proof that her theories about toxic masculinity are correct. And you know what? I'm fine with that. Let her have her narrative. Let her be the hero of her own story. Because I know the truth. I didn't fail her test. I refused to take it. I'm not perfect, and I never will be. But I'm a good man. And I deserve a partner who sees me as a person, not a project. I'm not jaded. I haven't given up on the idea of finding someone. But I'm not in a rush. I've learned that being alone is infinitely better than being in a relationship that makes you feel lonely. I've learned that my peace is worth more than anything. She wanted me to complete a huge to-do list to earn her affection. Instead, I opted out entirely. And it was the best decision I ever made.